Hey there, Alex Kidman from Finder with our video review of the brand new Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. This is Samsung's flagship phone for 2018, but you could be forgiven for thinking it wasn't just based on initial visual impressions, and that's because it looks an awful lot like last year's S8 design. They're still keeping with their whole unboxing motif with the Infinity Edge display. If you put the S9 Plus up against, for example, a Galaxy S8, as I've got just here, sure, the S9 Plus is a little bit bigger, but apart from that, at the front, they look very, very, very similar. It's really only when you flip them around to the back that you see the two big points of difference. Now, on the S9 Plus, but not the S9, you get a dual camera. Now that's an approach that Samsung first tried with the Note 8. The S9 Plus has a dual camera, the S9 only has a single camera, and I'll get onto the cameras in a minute. The other big change that Samsung's made in design terms is that they've finally shifted that darn fingerprint sensor down below the lens instead of to the side of it. It's still not quite a perfect design switch though, because when you're reaching for the fingerprint sensor, and especially if you're using the gesture that allows you to flick the notification blind up and down, you're probably still going to smear your fingerprints all over the lenses. The bodies themselves are quite attractive, that design is still quite good, and the new lilac colour is really quite eye-catching. Quite predictably though, they're massive fingerprint magnets. One nice inclusion for the Australian models, I don't know if this applies to the international ones, is that you do get a simple little TPU case to put on it. Highly recommended because for most of us, you're probably going to drop your phone at some point in time. The camera is of course the key feature for the S9 and S9 Plus, and that's for a variety of reasons, some of which stand up better than others. The most gimmicky feature has to be what Samsung's calling AR emojis, and what everyone else pretty much may as well call Samsung's take on the Emoji concept. That's the thing you get with an iPhone 10. Now, the basic way you capture an AR emoji is quite simple. You essentially take a selfie of yourself and it creates this avatar of you that's broadly reminiscent of the avatars that Microsoft tried to push down everyone's throats with the Xbox 360, including the same kind of hip clothing choices. They're not very me. Now, what you end up with is a very kind of bland, cartoony version of yourself. You can tweak it around the edges a bit, but it's always got that slight uncanny valley thing to it. There are some bigger problems though, because the range of expressions that you can actually capture is quite limited, and I'll demonstrate that now. So here's me talking as my AR emoji, but as you can probably see, the voice really just doesn't track well enough. And there are other expressions that it really can't pick up either. So for example, if you grit your teeth, it doesn't know about it at all. It can't handle that. It considers that your mouth is still quite wide open. You can wink, it can just about pick that up, but you can't actually open your eyes particularly wide, and overall the effect just isn't great. Samsung does automatically generate a range of animated Gifs for you to use as emojis, but again, these are fairly trite. I really don't see them taking off in a big way. One of the other new features with the camera is Samsung's new Super Slo-Mo feature. Now, when Samsung says it's a new feature, what they really mean is it's new to Samsung, because Sony had exactly this feature in the Xperia XZ Premium last year, and in its own XZ2, which is due out later this year, it'll have that feature at 1080p. The Samsung variant, as with the previous Sony variant, is 720p only. You also need really quite good light to get it firing. Now, Super Slo-Mo can be great for showing those little details in the world around us that you'd never really think of, but you've got to be careful in how you activate it. Samsung's default for this is a little action square, and when you engage Super Slo-Mo mode, it waits for action within that square, but the way it fires off is terribly unpredictable. You're actually much better off to flicking to manual control, because you will almost always guess correctly as to what you wanted in slow-mo, whereas the action square really doesn't crack it all that well. Then finally, of course, there's actually still image photography, and here the S9 Plus is really very, very good. And that's because it features a dual aperture lens. In low light situations, it cranks it down to an f1.5 so that you get better low light performance with less noise. In better lit conditions, it uses an f2.5 lens, and it switches between these dynamically if you're in auto mode. In pro mode, you can choose them. It's a slightly fiddly procedure, but it can be done. Still, the overall results speak for themselves because this is one of the sharpest and best smartphone cameras we've seen. It's still not going to seriously trouble the DSLR crowd, but it really does show how far we've come in smartphone camera terms. In terms of raw processing power, the S9 Plus is really up there as well. Samsung makes two variants, one based on the Qualcomm Snapdragon 845 and one on its own Exynos chipset. That's the variant we'll see in Australia. And the variant that I've tested really performs very, very well, both in a benchmark sense and in day-to-day usage. The S9 Plus that I've tested really performs very, very well, both in a benchmark sense, where it's right up there against its competitors, and in day-to-day usage. The S9 Plus is running on Android 8.0, and whilst the S8 is still waiting here in Australia for Oreo, you get it out of the box here with only a few minor tweaks. One of the better features that's almost hidden away is the fact that you can flip the entire display into landscape mode. This does do some interesting things to your widgets, but it's a great way to use that full 6.2-inch display. You do have to enable it though, and I find that kind of odd. I'm not sure why Samsung went down that path. In terms of battery life, the 3500 milliamp battery on board has excellent battery life. Easy full day performance, even if you're a reasonably heavy user, which I am. This is right up there in battery life terms, and it's great to see Samsung returning to having confidence in its batteries, obviously. So should you buy an S9 or S9 Plus? Well, that really depends on where you're coming from. Look, it's a better phone than the S8 and S8 Plus are, but you'd expect that. They absolutely should be. If you've got an S8 or S8 Plus on contract, I don't really think it's time to upgrade just yet. Wait for next year's phones because a 2-year upgrade cycle generally makes the most sense unless you're on that contract type that lets you switch up every year, in which case, go nuts. In the broad competitive Android space, this is right up there and highly recommended. Now, for full details including benchmark results, camera samples, contract plans and everything else you might